Man, do I got a story for you guys today. As you may or may not know, there are a lot of real estate scams, especially down in South Florida. And in the almost 11 years that I've been doing real estate here, I've seen quite a few of them and heard some horror stories from my clients. But never this one. This is a new one. So if you're interested in that, make sure you watch this video to the end because maybe you haven't heard of this scam either. Obviously, I'm not the one who came up with this scam, so I'm going to do my best to tell you guys the story. And it goes a little something like this. So I have a unit here in Miami Beach that I've managed for the past 5 years or so. I sold the unit to my clients and they live in Africa. They live outside the country and they're hardly ever here. And every year they trust me to either keep it rented to the same tenant or lease it to a new tenant. And sure enough, this year it's time to lease it to a new tenant. Okay, so what ended up happening was a couple of days ago, I got an email from the property manager at the building, and he told me that the unit was for sale. So right away, I thought that was suspicious, and I called him to figure out what was going on. And to make matters even more strange, I found out that the property was actually listed by him because not only is he the property manager of the building, he is also a realtor himself, which to me is very shady to take on a listing when you're like working for the building. To me, that's just a whole conflict of interest and that should be illegal, but that's for another story. But anyhow, this guy ended up listing the place for sale. Well, what happened is when my clients found out about this, it turns out that they never asked him to list the place for sale. These guys live in Africa, and somebody else who also lives in Africa, they reached out to the property manager of the building and asked him if he could sell the unit because they were short on cash or giving some kind of bullshit excuse, whatever it was, I don't know. So then he thought he was going to get a listing. He listed the place for sale. Well, he made a big mistake because number one, this property manager never checked to make sure whoever signed the listing agreement was actually the owner of the property. So that's big mistake number one. Big mistake number two, the person that signed the listing agreement had a different email address and different phone number that was recorded at the building. So the building has all this information, right? They have to keep all this on file for all of the owners there, and they have all the proper information for every single unit owner there. So he did not do his due diligence in making sure that this person was contacted, the actual owner of the unit, to make sure they did in fact want to sell. Of course, once my clients actually found out that their place was listed for sale without their consent, they were furious and also terrified because they were wondering how could this possibly happen? And I said, I don't know. I've never heard of this scam before. That's definitely a new one for me. But basically, we were able to catch it early, which was important because imagine if this whole thing would have went through. Imagine the guy listed the place for sale, they receive an offer, they go to contract, and then they get to the closing table, and if the person who's impersonating the actual owner of the property is good enough, they might actually be able to pass for the owner. If they have fake passport and they have all of the other person's information, they might actually be able to pass for the owner and actually close on that deal. If something like that were to happen, I don't even know what the consequences of that would be. There would have to be lawsuits and all kinds of legal proceedings to make sure the property was reverted back to the original owner. I don't even know. I'm not a lawyer. But what I do know is this scam could probably happen to anybody. And that's why this is an important story for you to hear. Because if you own property, especially if you own property out of state or out of country, then you need to have a broker or a property manager there in that town that you definitely trust, and you always use them over and over again because they're going to be watching the market. They know what's happening. They're going to see if something like this happens, like, hey, I see your place for sale, but you never told me you wanted to sell it. I guess that could happen if somebody decided to switch realtors or whatever, but most of the time, you're going to end up using the same realtor if you're happy with their service and they've done a good job for you in the past. There's no reason to usually switch, and people get comfortable. They know you, they trust you, and so on. Unfortunately, there's no way to ever avoid this scam entirely. This could really happen to anyone, but One thing that my client had going for them was they had me in their corner. I live here, and when I see something suspicious, I let them know about it, so they were able to figure out early on that this was happening. The other thing is they own a condo. It's not an actual house, so there's another barrier there. The property manager, the shady property manager that listed the place for sale, but nonetheless, the property manager of the building, so there was somebody else to raise a red flag and say, hey, something else is not right here. But if you owned a single family house, for example, then this kind of scam could happen to you without ever even realizing it, because if you don't have a realtor in town that you trust that you would normally use to sell or rent the place with, and you don't have a property manager because there's no HOA, then you have no idea if someone is contacting a realtor, pretending to be you, and potentially listing your property for sale, and since you live out of town, you won't even know it. The only thing you can really do, in my opinion, is if you have multiple properties and you live far away from them, is you can just check on all of them like once a month, not physically in person, but just Google the address, see if any kind of listing comes up with them, whether it's for rent or for sale, because you'd be surprised at how many different scams are out there and how many people will pull pictures from an old listing and relist it and pretend to be either the owner or the landlord in some cases, and you just really don't know. It's even happened something similar like this to one of my properties. Somebody pulled one of the pictures from one of my real listings and then they put it up for rent pretending to be the owner when obviously in fact they were not. So this happens all the time, and unfortunately it's all too common. So all you can really do is just make sure none of your properties are being listed for sale or for rent without your permission. And like I said before, you can make sure that you have a trusted realtor or property manager in your corner that you can rely on, who can verify if something like this is actually happening on your behalf. Because having somebody like that in your corner in situations like this, it'll be worth every penny that you've ever paid them to be able to spot a scam like this early before it's too late. If you have ever heard of a scam like this, or you've ever been involved in a scam like this, make sure to put it in the comments below so that way you can make other people out there aware of what's happening out there, because at the end of the day, when we know who's been involved and the things that they've went through, it gives us a little bit more knowledge of what to look for in the future so we all don't get scammed. Make sure you guys keep hanging out with me and watching more of my videos right here to help this channel grow, and I will see you next time.